Testing. Testing 1 2 3. Testing. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
perfectly, Chris. Good evening.
Hi, how are you? Speak one more time.
I'm terrific. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. We can hear you very clearly.
Perfect.
Welcome everyone to our regular monthly Board of Education meeting. To view this meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to the Board Docs website can be found via D38 website, www.lewispalmer.org, on the Board of Education meetings website. To view the live stream video of this meeting, please go to the Lewis Palmer School District 38 YouTube page. And Vicki, could you call roll, please?
Mr. Clausen? Here. Ms. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Here?
Ms. Upchurch?
Here.
Thank you. Matt, would you be willing to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
My pleasure. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Matt. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Questions, comments? Hearing none, Ms. Wood, would you call the roll or the
Mr.
vote?
Clausen?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
Awesome. So it's so great to see so many people. I know it's not as many as we've had in the past, but it's the most I've seen this year. And to me, that's wonderful. So we have some recognitions, and Board Member Teresa Phillips will help coordinate this. So if you would like to start.
Sure. So the first recognition of 3 or 4 that we have this evening is Miss Laura Lambrecht. Laura is an oboist and a senior at Palmer Ridge High School. She was recently acknowledged as the winner of this season's Denver Youth Artists Orchestra Wind Concerto Competition and will perform as soloist with that orchestra twice in November. Laura began piano lessons at the age of 3, but her biggest passion has been the oboe. She was a member of the Colorado Springs Youth Symphony for 5 years before joining the Denver Youth Artists Orchestra for the past 2 years. And she currently plays with Palmer Ridge Wind Ensemble. I think you play oboe with that ensemble, if I'm correct, and clarinet with the Symphonic Winds, both under the direction of Butch Eversole. So Ms. Lambrecht, if you would come up, we wanted to congratulate you. And she's also going to take a few minutes to let you know a few things about music in Lewis Palmer.
Okay. Hi. So I just want to say thank you to the board for recognizing me. That's like really nice. And I also wanted to say really quick how amazing our district's music programs are. I'm really lucky to be a part of them, and I know like for sure I would not have gotten this award without them. Both of the middle school and high school groups that I've played with have been excellent. I am really grateful to have been a part of the Monument Academy Band directed by Mr. Patterson and the Wind Ensemble at Palmer Ridge conducted by Butch Eversole. And my favorite thing about the music programs is that they make playing music enjoyable and fun, and it's something that kids really want to do. So I've noticed this in the high school, the middle school. I also teach some beginning oboe students, and they also tell me like how much they love band and that they love going to it every day, which is awesome. So I know the programs at those schools are great as well. I've also noticed that the community in the music community here, including teachers and students, is so inclusive, and it's really inspiring. And my favorite thing to do is go to class and make music with the people that I love to be around. So thank you to all the music directors and other people in District 38 who have helped me with my music to get where I am today. And I'm super lucky to be a part of the music community in the district. And thank you again to the board for recognizing me.
I can attest, because I have had a number of opportunities to hear Laura perform on a couple of different instruments. And Laura, you do such a wonderful job when you perform, because for those of you who have been in an audience or who are musicians yourself, music is never a singular moment. It is a shared experience. And so, Laura, you have shared many, many wonderful moments with a lot of people in our community. So thank you. So our second recognition will be Pastor Brian Petak from the Ascent Church. The Ascent Church recently sponsored the 5th annual Run for Hope Family Color Fun Run and the competitive 5K for schools. Over the past 4 years, many community members and organizations have come together to participate and support the annual 5K Run for Hope event that raises funds for Northern El Paso County High School and Junior High School Teen Suicide Prevention Program, Sources of Strength. Lewis Palmer High School and Palmer Ridge High School have been recipients of this funding. On behalf of the Board of Education, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor. It's good to see so many familiar faces here tonight as well. And to the board, thank you so much for this recognition. And Dr. Summers, thank you so much. It's really been an honor for us to be involved in the community. And for us to be recognized, it is an honor. But we don't do this for recognition. We do this with the Ascent Church and in the community for impact in the community. And so it has been our honor for the last 5 years to host this race and raise over I think it's about $115,000 now total for Sources of Strength suicide prevention programs in the local schools. And so there have been 4 schools that have benefited from these dollars over the last 4 years, but because we raised over $52,000 this year alone, we're able to now involve other schools. So we're going to be giving away around $3,000 per school to over 17 schools now. And so we're having to create an application for that, for schools to be involved. And so it hit really close to home. We know that the suicide rate in this county is astronomical. It's far too high. Even one suicide, of course, is too many. But it hit really close to home for us at the Ascent Church this last year when a junior from Lewis Palmer, Calvin Patterson, took his own life, and he was actually on my staff team at the Ascent Church, and so that was in December. And so it's never more important than when it hits that close to home, but we are so glad to be able to make this impact in the community, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students now are able to go through this program. And so it's so important for us to be talking openly with our kids about their mental health and encouraging them and keeping things positive. And that's what Sources of Strength does. And so it's our honor to continue to do this. We'll continue to do this race and raise funds and awareness. And so we would hope that all of you might be able to be involved, and other people that can be involved in the community to run, to sponsor, and to volunteer for this race. So thank you for this honor. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next recognition is for 2 organizations that D38 has partnered with for a number of years, and for some very, very important projects and activities. I'd like to invite Mr. Hicks, President of Monument Hill Kiwanis, and Ms. Haley Chapin, the Executive Director of Tri-Lakes Cares, along with Joshua Green, Director of Development at Tri-Lakes Cares, to come on up. we'd like to recognize them, and we will, let's see, once we get up, we will take a photo with additional people from Kiwanis and Trilix Cares.
Thank you. Good evening. Our Monument Hill Kiwanis Club and our Monument Hill Foundation are honored by your recognition of our efforts. Our mission is making a difference for youth in our community. We are proud to partner with D38 and Trilix Cares in our broad range of service and fundraising projects. I had hoped that Max Williams would be here this evening, but I don't believe he is. Is he? Oh, okay. All right. Hi, Max. Many of you know that Max is a 2019 inductee into the D38 Hall of Fame. Max is the director for our service leadership program and has been doing this work for over 27 years. We have Kiwanis K-Kids clubs in 5 D38 elementary schools, a builders club in the middle school, key clubs in our 2 high schools, and a very active club at UCCS. These kids run their own clubs with guidance from faculty and Kiwanis advisors. The goal of service leadership is to develop competent, capable, and compassionate student leaders by helping them to learn to help others. To us, it is very rewarding to see so many of these kids develop confidence and an interest in service to others. We also sponsor Key Leader and the Rocky Mountain Youth Leadership Programs designed to empower emerging student leaders. Among other projects, other local projects, we lead our Empty Bowls, which we just finished, Harvest of Love, ongoing right now, Salvation Army, bell ringing, just coming up, North Pole Arts and Crafts Fair, the 4th of July Parade, senior meals, and peach sales. But you know, these are not things that we do on our own. We are joined by a very generous community who help make our projects successful. In a normal year, we raise and pass on to this community about $120,000 and contribute about 15,000 service hours. We are invested in this community and our kids. So I have a quick pitch to help us continue doing these good works. Join us. Our memberships are open to everyone. We meet right here on Saturday mornings at Big Red at 8 a.m. We're done by 9:30, so you can continue your weekend. Each meeting includes an informative program of 30 minutes or so, and we have fun. So go to monumenthillkiwanis.org and find out how you can join us in making a difference for youth in our community. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to echo on Rich's comments. It does take a community, and there are several instances where we cross paths with both the district and Kiwanis at the same time. And it really does take a community to make the community better, and I think we are a perfect example of how collaboration can really come together and benefit our community members as a whole, because what information we're taking to the kids is coming back to their family. The way that we help provide for the community, the members in our community who need a little bit of extra support to get by, goes back into their home to the kids that are benefiting it. And when they have full tummies at night, they can go to school and learn. And so all of the services and the benefits that each of us offer to the community really help make it such a well-rounded, great place to be. So I second Rich's comments and thank you for all the partnership we've had along the years with the district and all the different activities that we collaborate on, and just being able to provide a better community for all those that are here. So thank you.
We're going to... I think let's take a moment for a photograph, and then Haley will proceed with a presentation that she has for us as well.
So if we have members from our board of directors, if they'd like to come up, and anybody from Kiwanis would like to come up to join, we'll take a group picture with everybody.
Good evening. My name is Josh Green. I'm Director of Development at Tri-Lakes Cares, and I just want to thank you, Board of Education, on behalf of Tri-Lakes Cares for inviting us here, giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about what we do. We know that in our community we have one of the lowest free and reduced lunch rates in the state, and yet there's a great need, and that need is often felt specifically by the educators that support the youth in our community, school counselors, the teachers, those of you that are in touch and connected with the youth that you serve. And we at Tri-Lakes Cares, we want to share that our services offer the opportunity to keep families fed and housed and together by providing housing assistance, food, and even support for mental health and other needs for each of those families. With the youth that we serve about 400 youth per week with our snack pack program. So just simply providing some snacks for them that they can use, either bringing them to lunch or as needed. And that ends up being about 30 students per school when you spread it across all of the schools in the district here. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Haley and let her share a little bit more about all that we do to support the community here.
Thank you very much. So everybody, many people are familiar with Tri-Lakes Cares, but our mission is up on the slide there. And really it's to be a wraparound community resource center to meet individuals and families' needs with where they are and help them with the tools and resources and products and services that we offer to create a better lives for them and their family. Some stats on our local region, and then off to the right in the USA, so that you can kind of see a little bit of how we compare. The box that's down on the bottom left is actually the federal poverty line. So if you look at the federal poverty line, it's going to be the same whether you live in Lyman or Manhattan. Now tell me the cost of living in both of those places is anywhere near the same. We find that in northern El Paso County, sometimes the cost of living up here is even more than even down in the Springs. And so several years back, our board of directors and our staff, we were going through strategic planning and realized that we were not doing a good job of reflecting the community we serve and how our access to products and services, maybe public transportation, we don't have that up here, is different than what you see down maybe in Colorado Springs. And we needed to be more reflective of our community. So we took, instead of going off of the federal poverty line, which is a lot of programs and services go off of that, we took the zip codes that we serve and said, what is their area median income? And then said, we're gonna do the bottom 50% of that. And that's what that box represents. So you might think, well, for a household of 4 to be able to make $68,000, that's a lot. Or you might be thinking, my family qualifies. And you may, and we are here to be able to help. I will tell you, the higher and closer you get to those income threshold guidelines, usually the less people we see. A lot of our clients are a lot lower, but that is the income guidelines of what would be eligible for financial assistance at our organization. The primary service territory are the zip codes listed above. However, we will never turn anyone away for food. So there are some products and services we offer. You have to be income and geography eligible, and then some you don't, because we will never turn anyone away who needs support. There are two types of poverty that we serve, and there are different folks that come in. And as they come into needing our services, our case managers do go through an intake process and interview them to find out where they're coming from, generational poverty or situational poverty. And we work with families very differently depending on where they're coming from to meet them. Can't have the same expectations of different people. And so we have to understand where they're coming from and where they are in order to best serve them. There are a bunch of hidden rules associated with poverty. And I'll give you an example on time, a couple different examples, how time is looked at by somebody who is in poverty compared to somebody who's in middle class and somebody who's in wealth. We can't have the same expectations of different people. And so this is just one example of how some kind of an item, a concept like time can be looked at. Here's money. We always talk about how people in poverty, they don't have money. Well, when they get money, they want to spend it. They don't have as much money as maybe somebody who's in middle class or wealth, where you have extra money to be able to manage it or conserve and investing. And conserving and investing is not something in the minds of a lot of the people that we work with. Food. Did you have enough to eat? Do you like it? Was it presented well? Different concepts are looked at differently by the clients we serve, and we have to understand where they're coming from in order to work well with them. Clothing, here's another example. Sometimes we see people and we judge and think they make the wrong decision because they got their nails done, or they have a fancy phone, or they're driving a fancy car, or they're wearing a designer shirt. Well, if they're working in a middle class or wealth business and they got to fit in, you might understand that a little bit better. So sometimes we don't understand why different people make different choices, but this helps us when we look at the hidden rules under each class. We had a client who came to us and said, there's just so many things going on in life. I have work, I have bills, I have transportation and food and housing, and there's just so much to juggle. And we said, how do you decide? How do you decide what to do? How do you rob Peter to pay Paul? And she said, whichever balloon floats down next. Whichever one loses its air, whichever bill gets disconnected, that's the one I pay. That's the one I deal with. And they live in the moment. They never have the ability to think further and remember that concept of time, to think for the future and plan for the future, because they're always living in the tyranny of the moment. So we have to make sure that we change the mindset and work with individuals to help them think towards the future. Different programs and services we offer, as you read in our mission statement on the first slide: emergency relief and self-sufficiency. Basically, if it falls in any one of those, we're probably going to come alongside those families and support them. But those are just some examples of what we do. Some non-traditional things and some pretty traditional things. But we like when clients come to us with a situation maybe we haven't dealt with before, and then our staff get to be very creative in figuring out how to problem solve that. Medical programs, one of them. Many people think of Tri-Lakes Cares as food pantry, and that's all we do. We do a lot more than that. But Dr. Gibbs is a volunteer doctor with Penrose St. Francis, and we have Nurse Cindy, who's an employee of the Sr3 system at Penrose, and they run our medical clinic. And so Dr. Gibbs can see patients. So if people are underinsured or uninsured, so uninsured meaning you don't have insurance, and underinsured meaning you have it, it's too expensive to use it. Your copays are too high or your deductibles too high. So you can come see our doc, and he can help you through whatever it is you need to navigate. Getting Ahead is a self-sufficiency program that we offer where we work with individuals who are stable enough to be able to concentrate on something like making lifestyle choices and changes for them and their family, move them on out of self-sufficiency, or move them on out of poverty towards self-sufficiency, excuse me. The bottom middle picture is actually a storyboard of one of our graduates where we talk about the concept of time, and they have to think of what their future story is. They have to think of the future and what future they're going to have for their family and their children. And so that's part of the project there. One of the best stories I can tell you about this is one of our first graduations. We had a client come up to us and she said, we told her it's a graduation. We've actually had them right here in this room and invited community members to participate. And she says, I've never graduated anything before. And she never got her GED, hasn't gone down that road yet, but she's gonna graduate our Getting Ahead program, and she's gonna get ahead for her and her family. And she said, are we gonna have a graduation cake? And we said, yeah. And that was so important to her. But I didn't think about it because I'm coming from middle class. A cake, okay. And then she said, is it gonna have my name on the cake? And we said, yeah. Okay, better get the name on the cake. And ever since that graduation, every Getting Ahead graduation, we have their names on the cake. Wasn't important to me. I never would have thought about it. I don't care if you put my name on the cake. It wasn't important to me, but it was important to her. Someone who never got to experience a graduation with their name on a cake, we could do that. One of the great stories that we had from Getting Ahead. So we have about 10 to 12 students that go through that, investigators at a time, and they 12 to 15 week-long class where they investigate their current situation, their future story, their community, their resources, lack of resources, and they plan a path out of poverty for them and their family. Many people know about us as a food program. That bottom left picture shows you the Help Yourself Market, where we have all of our items down there where people can come and help themselves. The dignity of being able to, that we take for granted, of going to the grocery store and picking your own tomato, rather than coming to a food pantry where it's already picked for you and you just get it. There's dignity in that you and I take for granted. And so we try to replicate what happens in middle class and wealth and let them experience the ability to help themselves and provide that extra twist to what sometimes can be dehumanizing of having to seek assistance for your family because you can't provide. 4 main reasons why someone leaves poverty. Some things there, some people say, well, it's just a choice. Just go get a job. Just stop doing drugs. Just stop doing this. Make good decisions for your family. It's not that easy. Many of you have probably heard stats about how many attempts it takes for someone to leave a domestic violence relationship, or how many attempts it takes to stop smoking. Well, guess what? It takes several attempts to leave poverty too, especially when you don't have a support system, or especially when your support system or your family is also in poverty. But many partnerships allow us to accomplish this great work, and so there's just a few of them. We just finished fiscal year 21, so we're still gathering stats on that, but here's some information on fiscal year 20. I'm just about done here. Clients that we've served, new households, pantry, these are our outputs. These are the butts in the seat and the pounds that have been given out, but it's not how lives have been changed or what we did with the dollar. Those are outcomes. So when you want to evaluate a nonprofit, that's a whole nother presentation I'm happy to give at some point. But when you want to evaluate a nonprofit, you ask them what their outcomes are. How did they change the lives? What value did they bring? What percentage of change of people's lives? That second to last bullet point on the bottom says Getting Ahead, 57% of the graduates increased their knowledge of those hidden rules. Sometimes before you can make the change, you just have to be aware of it. And if there's so many other balloons floating around, sometimes you can't even see it. So those are some of our outcomes from fiscal year 20. I threw this slide in just recently as we just finished fiscal year 21, but these are some of our big areas of spending, and you can see pre-pandemic, which is fiscal year 19, the chart, the bars on the left of each of those boxes. Fiscal year 20, which was the start of the pandemic, and then fiscal year 21 for us just ended September 30. But you could still see, other than utilities kind of being a little wonky, housing and transportation assistance are still on a climb, and our grand total of financial assistance is still high. Pre-pandemic, we were doing $157,000 worth of financial assistance, and last year we did $407,000. But thank you to the community and partnerships that help us bring in money, like Empty Bowls through Kiwanis and different ways that we can tap into some CARES funding that we were able to get. $407,000 worth of assistance to our local families. We do a lot with a little. our goods and services we provide, the food and sundries that we distribute. We try to do a lot with in-kind products and services where we don't have to pay, where the community donates it. All of you guys in the school district run that Harvest of Love program for us. All that food inundates us. We were all talking about it at our staff meeting today, getting ready for that dump load of food, 18 to 20,000 pounds of it. We're getting ready for it. And that allows us to increase that percentage of the pie from 41 even bigger. I want to get it to a 50-50 split. But our volunteers make that happen. So with a variety of different food programs and services or other products and services we offer, our volunteers really help do the dirty work. So that's a little bit of information about Tri-Lakes Cares. Just wanted to share that high level with you guys. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and present, to share more information about the work that we do and what you all make possible with all the support. So I'm happy to take a question or two if anybody has one. Wonderful. Where are we located and how can you help? It's a little dark up there, but we are located at 235 Jefferson, which you could really walk out here and go kitty corner right across the intersection there and see us. So we're in downtown Monument at 235 Jefferson Street is our office building. And folks can help in a variety of ways. They could get involved and volunteer. Our volunteer director of volunteers and community partnerships is taking on volunteers to help with everything from volunteering with the front desk and processing food, and all the Harvest of Love food that we're about to get is going to take a lot of processing, to being a volunteer and join our board of directors. 3 folks sitting in front of you are 3 of our board members here tonight, and they volunteer as well on our board. So depending on what level you're interested in getting involved in, but you could do time, talent, money. So time, if you got the time, we'd love to have you join our volunteer team. And talent, we have some folks who provide very specialized services that volunteer in our medical clinic, or they volunteer, help our clients with budget counseling or other specified or specialized programs and services. And then, of course, finances. You saw the big jump in what we spent for client services this past year because of a lot of the clients that we serve work in the industries that were impacted by COVID. And they need a lot of help. And so we're blessed to be able to have the funding to be able to be here and support. Another way that we work together too is the Mckinney-Vento Liaison that's with the school district. I know recently it was Stephanie Johnson, and now she's retired and there's a new gal in. But we work very closely with any families who are displaced or homeless or living in their car or couch surfing, keeping those kids in school and providing the least amount of disruption so that they can continue to stay focused on their education while their family handles a little bit of a life interruption is important. And so we can work with the McKinney-Vento Liaison rep for the school district to help ensure as much stability as possible for those kiddos during that difficult time. Oh, good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
I have a question. Since you're coming up on the Harvest of Love Drive, what are food items that are most in need of, and what are food items that you get plenty of?
We don't want any canned corn or green beans. No canned corn and green beans. We'll take it. Absolutely, we will take it. But we have a lot of it, and sometimes folks get sick of it. So I would say things that are shelf-stable for our food pantry that involve protein. So canned chicken, canned tuna, peanut butter, those kinds of things are always great. We also love things in our pantry that are non-traditional. So things like right now we have a shortage on toothbrushes for some reason. So toothbrushes, feminine hygiene items, those are not commonly donated and they're needed. We have shampoo and conditioner. When you think about it and you get food stamps as a benefit, a government benefit, doesn't buy shampoo and conditioner, doesn't buy toothpaste, doesn't buy your toothbrush. And so when families are forced with putting dinner on the table or keeping up on their hygiene, you gotta eat. You could go a day or 2 or 3 without brushing your teeth. And so then they need a dentist visit, and then they are hurting, and then they come to us in our medical clinic and we get them connected to that resource. So being able to provide some of those non-traditional things that the government doesn't provide on those programs is always, I think, what sets us apart as well. Another thing that we don't get donated often, which is not typically food, is laundry detergent and dishwasher detergent. And we love it when it's in powder or pods, because then we can divide it up and get it to multiple families. When it's in liquid, we can't. We give out tinfoil and saran wrap and trash bags, things that you and I take for granted. We have clients who will go to the fast food restaurants in town and they will empty the napkin dispensers and take that home so that they have toilet paper. Because food stamps doesn't cover toilet paper. And then they take home all those napkins, use that, and then they have a plumbing issue, and then they come to us and we have a repair that we have to financial assistance for. So non-traditional things. If you go home tonight, see how many things you touch that are consumable that you've bought at the grocery store that you don't typically donate to Tri-Lakes Cares. That's the stuff we need. So, but no canned corn and green beans. Protein, protein, protein. So thank you. That's a good question. Great. Anything else? I probably take a little more time, but thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Haley, for coming. And thank you all for those who were recognized. And before I turn it over, I was remiss. Laura Lambrecht's parents are here, Rob and Wendy Lambrecht. And I just wanted to acknowledge the parents in the audience because you are very formative in your children's lives.
The next agenda item is I'm going to let Dr. Summers introduce Thomas Fry, a senior from Palmer Ridge High School.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. So we are grateful to have Thomas with us this evening. And before he begins, obviously we are also grateful for all the great community partnerships that you have heard a little bit about tonight. One that I think follows from what was talked about a little bit earlier from Pastor Petak in regards to mental health and how we are providing supports and services in that effort. And so there's another partnership that I'd just like to elevate for a moment, and that is the SO Coalition, the Social Emotional Wellness Coalition. And that's a group that meets on a monthly basis. And for more information on that, you can look up SO Coalition. What Thomas was able to do about 2 months ago or so, right at the beginning of the school year, was as part of the kickoff to the Year of Story event. He was a keynote speaker, and he shared a story. He shared his voice. And as I think the board knows, student voice is very important to us as we continue to work not only with our strategic plan priorities, but just making sure that we are taking the time to hear our students. And so Thomas has something very powerful that he's going to share with us. I believe he's got a presentation that accompanies it. And without further ado, Thomas, feel free to you can grab the mic, sit down, make yourself comfortable. We're really happy that you're here. So welcome. Actually, real quick, because I know your mom is also in the audience. So Miss Sinead, and then also your younger brother, I believe, right? Connor Fry, sophomore from Palmer Ridge as well. So there you go. Thanks, Thomas.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm going to start off this by introducing myself in a few different ways, because I always think first impressions are really, really interesting. Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Thomas Fry. I'm a senior at Palmer Ridge High School, and I run varsity track and cross country. Okay. How about this? Hi, I'm Thomas Fry, and 2 years ago, I conducted an independent research project on how schools can specifically support teenage mental health. And for the last 2 years, I have been working with the school and the district to develop solutions on that. Okay, great. Okay, how about this? Hi, I'm Thomas Fry, and I have an anxiety disorder. Now, I don't say that so you guys feel sorry for me. I say that so that I can share my story that I think is very relevant for a lot of different high schoolers my age. So when I first acknowledged that I had problems controlling my anxiety and that I had an anxiety disorder, I felt so alone. I didn't know who else felt like this. I didn't know people my age, any other high schoolers. And I was pretty terrified. What is this? What's happening to me? What's wrong with me? Why do I walk into a classroom and get butterflies in my stomach? Why do I feel like throwing up every time I line up for a running race? Why do I have these panic attacks? And I didn't have anyone to reach out to. Just teachers arbitrarily telling me to reach out, but to who or where? I didn't know who my counselor was. I didn't know where to find them. I didn't have any answers. And so this is the problem that I want to fix in schools. In schools, mental health problems need to be talked about. Before that, they need to be taught about. So let me break down the problem for you real quick, because I think that's the first thing you have to do before you solve a problem. 1 in 5 high school students meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder. 8% have depression, and about a quarter of them have symptoms of depression. And almost 24% have insomnia. So in a class of about 30 students, you'll have 5 or 6 with anxiety disorder, you'll have about 2 to 3 with depression, and you'll have 7 or 8 with insomnia. And all those kids were going through the same thing I was, with questions around their heads that they didn't know the answers to. What's happening to me? What's wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? And we see that they're also not reaching out or using our school resources because they're worried about being judged, because of the stigma. As part of my study, I conducted a survey. I looked at how many of these students are feeling anxious and how many of them would reach out to school services, that being counselors, that being social workers, because that's what they're there for. 70% said they were feeling significant anxiety related to school, and only 10% said that they would actually reach out to school services about this. So we're not providing enough, and we're not educating enough. So let me give you an example of how we can teach about this stuff. Let me define to you what anxiety is. Anxiety is the fight or flight response you get when your life is in danger. So if there's a bear over there, and the bear wants to eat me, I'm going to get adrenaline rushing through my legs. I'm going to get my vision focusing, my world's going to slow down, and my instincts are going to decide for me, am I going to run away from that bear, or am I going to fight that bear? Now, being me, I'm going to run as far and as fast away from that bear as I can. But you guys can do you. But that's the thing. Anxiety can be broken down to a tangible biological reasoning for it. Now, a disorder is just when that panic attack and when that fight or flight response misfires. A room of crowded people, or you walk into a class to take a test, and you get that response. And that's all it is. Like I said, there's a scientific reason for this. And that made me feel a lot better. But here's the thing. I was never taught about that in school. This is something that I had to research on my own. And so here are my solutions. Because I think that we talk about mental health a lot, but we don't actually introduce any tangible solutions to this. We can have teachers set aside a portion of their class to teach about this stuff so that we can have real, honest conversations about this stuff. Or we can have seminars about mental health where we talk about this in school. I don't think mental health should be something that's just talked about once a year in a study hall. This is something that should be talked about monthly or even weekly. And not just talked about, it should be taught about. Counselors. We need more of them because each counselor in our school is responsible for about 200 to 300 kids. And they can't take care of all of them the same way that, say, they could if they were responsible for 50 kids. We need more of them, and we need to pay them more. We need to keep them in our school district so that the counseling office isn't just a constant revolving door like it is in my school. Teachers should learn how to give leeway on assignments because they'll recognize that a student learning how to cope with their mental health is more important than a geometry assignment. And students will be able to form clubs and self-help groups where they can share their story that are relevant and emotional and not feel as alone. In my research project, these are some of the things that I introduced, some of the solutions I developed for how schools can better support teenage mental health. See, because mental health is something that has always been something that's been in the private industry. We learn about it in therapy, in psychiatry, but it's not something that's general. And public schools have an opportunity, and I think they have a duty to make that education universal. Because us students, we're ready to talk about this, and we're ready to develop solutions. So at the beginning of the speech, I introduced myself as having an anxiety disorder. I kind of framed myself as an underdog. I had an underdog story. But here's the thing. In my work with students as a mentor at my school, in my work with the SO Coalition, where we work with other people so that they can share their stories, you get to learn that everybody has a story like that. Everybody has an underdog story. But we never see that in school. So that's something that we need to put at the forefront. Everybody has an underdog story. And so if nothing comes out of this, then at least take that from. Thank you, guys.
Thomas, I just really appreciate that at the end of your presentation, you're listing possible solutions, because I think it's one thing to talk about what's challenging, but then wanting to get to possible solutions. And so looking at your list of possible solutions in front of us, yes, what do you think are the most actionable changes that could be made or had at Palmer Ridge, for instance, where you are at right now?
Things we can do right now. Like I said, I think that taking time out of classes, making curriculums for seminars about mental health, that's something that we need to talk about, because that's learning the basic education about mental health that a lot of kids don't know. A lot of kids don't know that depression isn't just about being sad. A lot of kids don't know the coping mechanisms they can do about anxiety. That's one of the biggest things I think that we can do. I also think we need to make counselors more active in schools, and we need to make them more approachable for students. So like in my school, the counselor is kind of tucked into a corner behind the testing center. No one really knows where they are. We need to make them more known to students. We need to make counselors, come out and meet students and give presentations so that students know who they are and that they're a resource they can reach out to. Those are two things I think we can do right now. The third thing is, right now I'm working with the SO Coalition on how we can talk with LPTV and Ridgeline on how they can kind of record and share other people sharing their stories, kind of like what I just did. So that way, hopefully we can share those stories and kind of foster empathy. I think those are three very actionable things that we can have right now that I think will make an effect. And then there are other long-term things in the structure of the district that we can do. Like one of the things I proposed in my study is that we move this education and we talk about it even in younger kids, like in elementary school and middle school. That's something that would take a little bit longer to do, and that's something that could take a little bit more research to put down. But those are my three things that will make a difference right now, I think.
So Thomas, first of all, thank you for being with us tonight. I'm usually used to seeing you wearing a cross-country frack shirt on, and it's good to have your mom here. You come from a wonderful family, and I'm really proud of you. It took a lot of strength to be here and share this message. What can we do as a district to help more kids that are struggling in this area? We talked about the possible solutions, but my guess is, and you somewhat articulated this, is that there's a lot of kids that struggle with similar type disorders, and they just don't want to come forward. So what advice and counsel would you have for us?
Mm-hmm. So like I said last time, education is the big thing. Put a slideshow up about what is this disorder, what are the symptoms, what to do if you feel like you have some of these symptoms or your friend has one of those symptoms. Because defining it is the first thing that they can do before they reach out. The other thing that you guys can do is, I think that this comes down to the faculty more than anything, the teachers and the counselors, and really saying that this is a priority, that mental health should have priority over your schoolwork sometimes. One of the things I also talked about in my research is lowering the workload, and mostly because I think that we need to learn coping mechanisms around mental health before we kind of feel like we're overwhelmed with work. And so teachers learning how to teach that, and teaching not only their subject, but how to live, and that your mental health should be a priority. I think that that's a big thing as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you guys.
Thomas, there you go. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. We have a small note of recognition for you as well, and I think your mom may want a photo as well as luck.
That tends to take your breath away. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, the board will hear comments from the public per board policy BEDH, public participation at school board meetings. All regular and special meetings of the board shall be open to the public. Because the board desires to hear the viewpoints of all citizens throughout the district and also needs to conduct its business in an orderly and efficient manner, it shall schedule time during board meetings for brief comments from residents and property owners of the district, parents and employees, and students. There is one time for public comment, and it is limited to 30 minutes. In an effort to allow all who wish to speak, the amount of time dedicated to each speaker will be dependent on the number of people who sign up, with the entire public comment period not to exceed 30 minutes. If 10 or fewer people sign up, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. The sign-up sheet for public comments has been available until 5 p.m. in the Learning Center. The board respects the rights of the public to speak on matters concerning the operation of the schools. We believe that public comments that are critical of district staff, however, often cause unnecessary harm to those employees and to the education of our students. As a result, we prefer that members of the public share any criticism of employees in writing with the superintendent, who is responsible for supervising all staff and then involving the board as necessary. If you choose instead to address a personal issue publicly, please understand that the board does not endorse the comments of any speaker and reminds all who speak that they assume the risk of legal action by district employees in the event the affected employees believe that any comments about them violate legal standards. In addition, speakers may be asked to appoint a person if the topic is a group concern. Lastly, keep in mind we may have K through 12 students in the audience. Please keep all comments appropriate to our audience. So I have the list. We have 2, 4, 6 people that have signed up tonight. We'll start with Charles Patchett, who's a parent resident, I believe.
Good evening. First, that took courage. Well done. My name's Chuck Patchett. I'm a parent and a resident here in D38. I have a 5th grader at Bear Creek. I have a 8th grader at Lewis Palmer Middle School, which I'll have a question for you at the very end. I want to talk to you tonight about the range of COVID mitigation strategies that the district employs. It's sort of on the spectrum, right? The spectrum on the one side being simple things like distancing and closing down water fountains and masks. And then we're in the middle, you get things like cohorts. And on the far side, you get things like remote learning. And we've had to do all those things over the last year. And I think they've all been employed very well. Sir, you mentioned criticism of D38 employees. I don't have any of that. I think you guys have done an amazing job. I really do. Especially considering a really tough 18 months that we've all had to go through. So if there's any doubt in your mind that I'm here to just moan, I'm not. That said, there's a new tool in the arsenal of COVID mitigation strategies that's coming. And it's being employed in other places, or it's starting to, and that is with vaccination mandates for children. These are particularly gaining traction in places like California, right? They're coming in very strong on this. And I'm not against vaccines. I'm vaccinated myself, right? I think vaccination is a risk analysis exercise. I really do. In my case, it makes sense. For my children, it doesn't. You can find the numbers out there. A 10 to 19-year-old is slightly more likely to be struck by lightning than to die of COVID. For a 5 to 9-year-old, they're 7 times more likely to be struck by lightning. And there's no long-term studies yet about what the effects of this are. Right? And there's unknown risks for, especially for boys that are coming up, things like myocarditis, right? This is a big deal. It's unknown, and it's inappropriate for children. So where does that sort of leave me with this discussion? What I want to do is I want to make my position as a parent clear to you guys. And hopefully we never come to this kind of circumstance, but I think it's good that I air this, because I think there's a lot of other parents, especially ones I've talked to, that feel the same. If a vaccine mandate for kids ever becomes something that did I get cut? No. If a vaccine mandate for children is something that ever gets put into place, I have three things I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to immediately withdraw my children from the school. I don't want to do that. They love the schools here. They love their teachers. They're very happy. But I will do that. The second thing I'll do is I'll rally with other like-minded parents, and we'll employ a private teacher. Right? Your teachers are great. I think you should give them a raise. If you don't, I will. Third thing I'll do is I'll rally with like-minded parents, and we'll retain legal counsel. And we'll do whatever we have to do to take on the district, the state, whoever that is. I don't want to do that either. Right? That costs my money. That costs the community's money. That costs your money. Right? And finally, I don't think that you're going to get to this stage, but these things snowball very quickly. Right? 4 months ago, there were no vaccine mandates for employers, anything like that. But now, I'm a month away from losing my job if I don't fulfill a vaccine mandate. Right? Choice of bread on the table versus get the vaccine, it's an easy choice. Right? Choice of long-term effects for something that's not understood for my kids, I'll pull them out of school. Okay? So that's where I stand.
Your time's almost up, so please.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I don't have anything else other than to say I think you guys have done really well, and I appreciate your efforts. I really do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Walsh, a parent.
Ready for me to go? All right,
Please.
good evening. Thanks for giving me the chance to speak in front of you. I wanted to speak tonight in teaching about controversial issues and use of controversial materials policy. I am very happy that we're looking at this policy and going to push that through. So there's so many things going on in this world right now that's set to divide us. Okay, a united America is an unstoppable America, and I personally view any controversial racial-based topics to be something that's set to divide us even further. Okay, and I don't think as a community, as a society, that that's something that we need to do. The organizations that are pushing these materials out, I don't know if anyone's looked at the materials or anything. It's wrapped up in very flowery, nice words, but in reality, when you dig into the websites and research the materials, it's very hateful, and the terminology is racist in itself. Okay, and a few examples of that is, no child. I don't know every child in the district, but I love the kids the same as I love my own kids. Okay, and there's no reason why any child should ever be told that they are inferior to someone else or superior to someone else simply based on characteristics they were born with that they can't control. Okay, so I completely support teaching materials. I completely support, the discussions, but not to a point where anybody should feel less than or superior, if that makes sense. So viewing everything through a racial lens, okay, is doing harm to the society. We see the stories on the news, we see what's going on, and viewing everything in that way is harmful and hurtful to people. So we should not be doing it in our schools either. I hope everybody can agree. I know I'm very firm. Any racism, anything should be strongly condemned, right? In the strongest of terms, okay? And telling anyone they are less than based on the color of their skin is racist in itself, okay? I completely agree with we should be treating every student with their individual backgrounds, but we should also be treating them with their individual dignity that is deserved for that. So with that, I strongly support this policy, and thank you for taking that into account.
Thank you. Janice Spikes, a grandparent.
I am a grandparent. I'm very proud of my little granddaughter. She's 7. And they moved here because I lived in Monument. I'm very proud of this community, and listening to everybody tonight makes me even more proud of being a part of this community. I moved here in 2014 and have enjoyed every bit of living in this community and in Colorado. And because of me living here, my family moved here, and I get to be close to them, and I'm very much a part of Kylie's life. And I wanted to come here and voice a concern of what could possibly be taught to my granddaughter, and that is critical race theory. She's very, very young, and our children at a very young age are very, very impressionable. And we as parents and grandparents are very, very concerned. And I want to thank each of you personally that you have given us a choice of freedom in the mask aspect that has been talked about, for a long time. Now it's critical race theory. And I think as each of us read about it, we get a pit in our stomach. We don't know what is going on in our country, and yet we are so concerned about it. So this is my opportunity to come and voice my opinion and my desire that that is not taught in this community. This is a great community, but this is not going to help any of us. It's a negative way of teaching children different aspects of our life. And yes, we do have things that go on, but it's a divisive way of teaching. It's a negative way of teaching. And I don't think any of us want that in any way. We want to raise responsible children. And we can't do that with a critical race theory, which is strictly what it is. And it's one of 8 ways that we work toward Marxism. It's dangerous. And we don't need our children to grow up hating this country and hating themselves, because that's what it does. So I thank you very, very much for letting me speak as a grandparent and a very concerned citizen of this country, this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Starla Mercer, a parent.
I just want to echo what the community has already said to you all, that you guys are doing a wonderful job, and you're doing your job by listening to the voice of us parents in regards to the masking and allowing parent choice over the past 18 months. And I also want to just let you know that the community supports you in this policy and improving it. And I agree that critical race theory and whatnot should be taught in the home if that's the family's choice and not in the schools. So thank you all so much, and keep doing what you're doing. You guys are the heroes of the community right now. You are leading our children, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn Bedingfield, a grandparent.
have anything really controversial to say, just some question. I would like to encourage the Lewis Palmer School District to consider adding a high school program to the homeschool enrichment program. Currently, Lewis Palmer offers homeschool enrichment through grade 8. Homeschool enrichment has become increasingly popular in the last couple years. In our area, there are now 4 homeschool enrichment programs for high schoolers. Monument Academy offers this, and Education Re-envisioned BOCES here in Monument has 3 schools it authorizes. Ascend College Prep opened this year as a brick and mortar school and offers homeschool enrichment. Haven School is a homeschool enrichment program in the Black Forest, and Williamsburg Learning is an online homeschool enrichment through Education Re-envisioned. This would be a great opportunity for Lewis Palmer to offer a quality in-person program with certified and licensed teachers for our local high schoolers.
Thank you. Linda Zark, parent? Okay. Thank you. That will conclude the public comment period. So the next item agenda is board member comments, and I think, Matt, would you be willing to start, and this will work toward me?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot. I just want to thank everyone that presented today, and especially the great things that are happening in our community. Tri-Lakes Care, the Kiwanis Clubs, and Thomas Fry, all great presentations, and you know, this is just a small portion of what makes this community great, and thank you so much for being here and for everything you do for our community.
Well, I had a couple things I wanted to share, but after hearing today's presentations, I do want to take a pause and say that Thomas, you said something that had an impact on me, and that is that we all have a story. And we all do have a story. Some of you in this room I don't know, some of you in this room I do know. And I imagine that goes throughout our community. And as we continue to navigate the issues in front of us and ahead of us and in front of us now, I hope that we can all appreciate how much we each care for our community and our kids as we are advocating and we're serving and we're working. And we all do have stories. I grew up on food stamps, so you know, everybody has a story that nobody knows, and I hope that when we are engaging with each other, that each of us recognize the uniqueness of each of our thoughts, and that sometimes there's no easy explanation or answer, such as school finance in Colorado, that's unique, and at the same time, sometimes it's the little things and the important things that I hope we remember that are the wonderful things that get us through our day and remind us of the positive ways in which we can affect the world around us, from homecomings to music concerts to community fundraisers or running a 5K, or for some of us walking. But it's the simple things sometimes that we have to hold on to and remember as we interact with each other. So thank you for that, for reminding me of that today. I also wanted to point out that we had our first DAC meeting last week, and it was Tuesday, and our new district leadership liaisons for our DAC is Michael Braum and Ember Wentstein. And during the DAC meetings, at each of our meeting updates, we are going to be doing something different, where we're presenting one of our big rocks at each of our meetings, similar to what we do in the board meetings. So, for example, this past week, Mr. Coates and Mr. Frampton presented on goal number 1. And then something that's also really unique that I really appreciate is the alignment of how our schools are also aligning with those goals. So there's an opportunity for each of our buildings to do a share out of things they're doing or aiming to do that relate to that particular big rock. For example, Prairie Winds presented on their new vestibules. And I also wanted to take a moment to say thank you to Mr. Frampton. You shared something that I thought was very important and is personal, and that is the use of restorative practices to reduce. And restorative practices, for those that don't know, it's a way of discipline, and it helps reduce crime, bullying, improves human behavior, and it's done through relationship building, responsibility for your actions. and the ability to repair and reintegrate. So personally, I'm in full transparency, I think it's a much more effective practice, and I appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that out. And then last, I attended 2 MA meetings last week on MA is now in the engaging in discussion and seeking input from their families as they begin looking at phase 2 of the new builds for their East Campus. So there's a lot in progress there, but they had a forum with their families, and they also discussed it in their board meeting. So, but again, that's all part of, we're all a big part of this community, and all of our kids are our kids, and all of our teachers are our teachers. So that's all I have to say.
I'm just really grateful for the very articulate young people we have in our community. And I'm very grateful, Thomas, that you were here, and Laura, who's left. But to hear your voices is so impactful for us as a board, because you are the reason we do and volunteer the time we do. So thank you for being here. And also to Haley and to the other presenters, for us to see firsthand how our coordination comes together in a way that is truly life-giving in our community, I think is a wonderful reminder as to why we are here. And I mean we as in all of us as a community. So thank you to all of you who are just here to listen to our board meeting. Thank you to those of you who came to comment. Your comments are always welcome and always helpful. And that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron, would you like to share anything this evening?
No comments this evening. Thank you.
I just will let you know you're sitting right by me, and you look pretty good.
Well, clearly I won the raffle.
We got your name tag out. It looks good. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, what a pleasant evening, and what a good time that we can be actually together in the same room and talk. You know, connections are really important in life. Whether we're in school or whether we're at work or wherever we're at, connections are really important to us. It's important to our mental health. It's important to our physical health, our emotional health. It really is. Connections cannot be understated in their value. So I appreciated the connections that I felt tonight from, in some cases, strangers, but I feel like that strange part went away. And I appreciate the courage, the experience, the background, the perspectives that are shared, because it does take down barriers. I would like to also just say that, you know, I went out and looked at the El Paso public health data today, and it's really nice to see all of the graphs that track COVID are in the right direction, and that's encouraging. Who knows what the future holds, as we have not known the future for 18 months as we've tried to navigate this whole pandemic, endemic, whatever we are at now. But my kudos to Dr. Summers again for his leadership during this pandemic and trying to keep kids first, recognizing there's many perspectives, and we've heard them all. I guarantee you we've heard all the perspectives. I can't imagine one we haven't heard, but maybe there are. Keep bringing them in. We'll keep listening. But I just am impressed that my kids, I'll speak to them since I see them every day, are happier this year. It isn't totally normal yet, but they're happy, and I can tell they're learning, and I can tell they have relationships, connections that matter, and it makes all the difference. So thank you, Dr. Summers, and for the administration for all that you do. I do hope and ask that one day we can have work sessions perhaps at the school sites so that we can actually feel some of those connections more closely and have more people involved, whether it's out on the plains of Kilmer or over by the mountains of Palmer Lake or wherever. The point being is those connections are important, and I think tonight probably emphasizes how important connections really are. So I'd like to see us, if we can, when it's possible, schedule our work sessions, so that'd be once a month, we'd be at a different site, and hopefully connect more with parents and students at those sites. I think that would be a good thing, and when it's practical. So thank you, Dr. Summers, you're up for your update.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, and thank you to the entire board for not only your comments this evening, but your continued service and sacrifice. And I don't know how many of you have been watching the news as of late, but to hear a board meeting and the word pleasant in the same sentence, I think is actually a testament to the value that our community has from the perspective that we're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But I think what we're going to stay focused on is absolutely doing what's right for our children and attending to all the multiple challenges that we are confronted with. And I'm just honored to sit alongside you all here and continue to serve in this capacity. I'm going to ask Mark to just keep me on track here. So I did produce for this meeting a brief PowerPoint overview because even though every board meeting we are taking time within a particular priority of our strategic plan to deep dive, and tonight we're going to be doing that within priority 3, there is quite a bit that is also going on with respect to other elements of our strategic plan and just fun things that we want to be able to share and celebrate. So I am going to go in order here, starting with priority 1, and I'll just hit a few of these bullet points at a high level. Please stop me if there's any questions or additional information you may be seeking. The first item under priority 1 is that our security vestibules are nearing 100% completion. They're all functional. However, we have learned because of all the nuances at our individual sites that there's just some additional work that has to occur either with respect to the vestibule or around it. For example, at Lewis Palmer Elementary School, it's great to have the vestibule, but we don't necessarily have the desk and the ability to staff right next to that door right now, how we're monitoring that. So that's a work in progress. Kudos to the LPE team as well as the Bear Creek and Prairie Winds team for how they have adjusted to that. As many of you know, that is work that has been completed. Have a good night, guys. Thanks again, Thomas. So that's work that is consistent with our Schneider Electric contract, and I'd like to invite our Schneider team to come out in the next month or two to go a little bit deeper into these areas, but the work that we are positioned to accomplish is ongoing, as we know, and on a variety of different schedules and a lot of different coordination that's taking place. But I just wanted to elevate that performance savings contract, which will save us about 23% in operational expenses, is something that is underway and something that we're very excited about as we continue moving forward. One of the things that we mentioned at a recent priority 1 discussion was our student climate survey. And that is a service that we are contracting through Panorama. We have a draft of those questions, and we're getting close to being able to produce those and share those with our community and especially our parents so that they understand what the questions are. And we're targeting a survey administration in early November. There is an opportunity to opt out. However, I do believe once our parents see these questions, unless there are reasons, of course, why somebody would not want their student to participate, all the questions are really focused on how our students are perceiving their experience within the school context, both in terms of their relationships, their belief in what's working for them. So I would say compared to things like the Healthy Colorado Kids Survey, which I know got a lot of attention recently and we are not doing as a district, I believe this is survey data that'll be quite useful for our efforts around Priority 1 and others. We also have something that we are introducing this year called Vape Educate. And so one of the things that we've noticed is there is a trend among some of our students who maybe making use of a vape, which we know is against our protocols and rules and expectations on our school site. So this is, and I actually will give credit to Dr. Frank, who's in the audience. So hi, Dr. Frank, new principal at Palmer Ridge. He's probably expecting me not to say something about this, but that's okay. No, you came here to celebrate all the great work that your students are doing and others. But ultimately, this is something that will aim to reduce the use and the impact on our campus. So it's a video that students will watch that explains to them all of the facts and the figures and is really aimed to help change the perception of what our students are thinking about when perhaps they're making a decision that we know can be harmful not only to their health, but again to the safety and security of our campuses. So we're excited to be able to bring that in. It has definitely more of a restorative justice type flair to how we're working with students, so it goes beyond just a suspension and it really helps restore the student into our campus, as well as helping them become more educated on those dangers. The other thing I wanted to call out, and this was a highlight for me last Thursday, so Lewis Palmer Middle School, on a non-school day, or non-student school day, this was last Thursday, we had about 25 7th and 8th graders, many of them volunteers who came in on a school day that, again, was not classes in session. And they were trained as No Place for Hate facilitators. And I could say a lot about what this group did and how they were able to rally around each other and the benefits of the training, but we have a short video that I believe is queued up, and I'm going to let the video do some of the talking for us on this. So without further ado.
How are you going to do it? Facilitate. Stand up and speak out. Stand up and speak out. 1, 2, 3. Who are you? Lewis Palmer Middle School. What's your mascot? Patriots. What are you? Leaders and facilitators. For what program? No Place for Hate peer trainers. And why are you leaders? To make everyone welcome. To give confidence. To build self-respect. To create a safe environment. To encourage others to change. How are you going to do that? Facilitate. Stand up and speak out. Stand up and speak out. Woo! Who are you again? Lewis Palmer Middle School. Good job.
So I think you can see a quick snapshot of the enthusiasm and the energy that our students brought into that training. What would be great is to get some updates from them as they are working toward implementing their learning in this process. My understanding is that the school will have multiple opportunities for our trained peer facilitators to indeed connect with their classmates and provide some of that facilitative training. So just something that we're really excited about and brings more life to something like social emotional learning curriculum when we talk so much about the importance of our students feeling welcome and a sense of belonging and valuing them, or valuing all students with dignity and respect. That's one thing to put it into adult words, it's another thing when you hear it from our students. So kudos again to LPMS. And as part of our Priority 1 update, also wanted to share with you, as you know, our updated COVID-19 numbers that we are sharing with you every couple of weeks here. So what you can see is the current number of cases on the left-hand column, total number of cases from the beginning of the school year on the right-hand column. The other thing I did want to make mention of, we're continuing to hear a variety of updates both from Colorado Department of Public Health and Education, as well as continuous efforts to stay in collaboration with El Paso County Public Health. As was alluded to a little bit earlier in the public comment, yes, we are aware that there is going to be a vaccine that is made available for students as young as 5 all the way to 11. As you know, right now there is a vaccine that's available or accessible for those that are 12 and up. Not necessarily just to the point of the public comment, but I can tell you officially that there is no conversation that I am aware of, either at the state level, locally or certainly within our district that would be exploring the use of vaccines as part of a mandate. So at this point, we are just aware of what information comes our way. Certainly we're happy to continue to share that communication out with the community, but we do see that being a choice that parents will make, and there's additional information that's in a weekly data brief that is provided by El Paso County Health as well that speaks to what these numbers look like at a broader county level context. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that may be there around COVID numbers or priority one.
The COVID numbers include students and staff.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, moving to priority two. So there's several items here, and what I wanted to do is just elevate some of the work that's occurring through our monthly, what we refer to as our district leadership team gatherings, if you will. So we have established a system where we are visiting each of our school sites. Earlier this month, we spent some time at Lewis Palmer Elementary School. So this includes all of our principals and a few members of our district leadership or executive leadership team. And as we're spending time together, one of the features of that experience together is to visit classrooms and really spend time touring the school. And there were a few items that we were focusing in on through this visit, including our literacy, K-5 literacy curriculum implementation. We saw a lot of evidence of capturing kids' hearts being part of the fabric of the school, and how the school site and the staff emphasize those practices in every interaction that they have with students, obviously, but also among adults. And I think one of the highlights at Lewis Palmer Elementary, with several programming aspects of meeting the needs of students with significant needs, is a commitment to inclusion. So to be able to see students who are fully included in classes with the support of either paraprofessionals or other teachers is just something that's really impressive to witness. And it's one of the many great things that we're able to do when we come together. So we're looking forward to more of those visits on a month-to-month basis. Something that I think you are also aware of is that our efforts toward a leadership induction program, as well as our assistant principal and dean PLCs, which are in large part right now being led, organized and coordinated by Jenny Day, our leadership and learning coach, is just a joy to be a part of and to see the growth of our leaders within those different spaces. We are seeing some next steps occur with our Portrait of a Graduate. That work is progressing with 2 student interns. And so in addition to working to survey multiple community members, we're also working to schedule time in schools and getting more student and teacher feedback in that effort as well. So we look forward to sharing out more of those details in the future. We were able to hire a new preschool director recently, and so this will help our efforts in bringing back our Palmer Lake Early Childhood Education Center. So we're hoping that that timeline will be in the next several weeks. And as another shout out just to our leaders, this is National Principals Month, and it looks like Dr. Frank took his leave right on cue with that. But we're just thrilled to have, and I think the next slide has a nice picture of all of our principals who just put so much of themselves into their schools and into their craft. And so that's one of the things that among many in our system, that I'm just very pleased to share is fantastic leadership at our school sites and continuous collaborative efforts in that process. One additional priority 2 update, and this also is an extension of our partnership with Schneider Electric, is that we were co-hosts of the first ever Students in STEAM event, which was held on Friday, October 8th. So there are actually 7 districts, including D38, who were able to be part of that experience. And the students had a variety of different activities that they were involved in, including a Capcom structure building to driving rovers on Mars. There was also Discovery Science Center staff who helped facilitate a variety of fun rotational experiences, including the Mars Planetarium Space Room and, again, an opportunity for the students to control rovers at a lunar base. So we had about 14 or 15 students, I believe, specifically from D38, and there was about 60 students, again, from a number of districts. So big kudos to Mr. Ken Mata from Lewis Palmer Middle School and Miss Jess McAllister, the students of Lewis Palmer Middle, and again, our friends at Schneider who helped facilitate this event. Priority 3, we'll spend a little bit more time on, just a few quick updates, highlights there. We are continuing our efforts around developing pardon me, an employee gratitude program that we're hoping to launch here as we work into the November and December months. Also, an effort to work in conjunction with Priority 5 on communicating employee recognition and kudos. And then one of our bigger challenges continues to be training and support for substitute teachers and additional efforts to increase coverage. So that will be something that we're continuing to partner with our school sites on. Within Priority 4, and you'll hear a little bit more about this within our update later this evening, there will be an effort to recruit individuals who are interested in serving on our financial advisory committee. So look to see that here in the next day or two as far as that application process. And we'd like to kick that work off here in the beginning of November. Sr3 Survey Feedback, we were grateful for a number of comments from the community. Tonight we'll be presenting some preliminary recommendations and continuing that feedback loop so that we have an opportunity to draft what our initial thoughts are and work toward refining those prior to our official budget submission. And then, as you know, our October count window has wrapped up, so we are in a preliminary analysis of those numbers. Just going to highlight a few aspects of that. One, we did use a conservative estimate of funded pupil count for what we adopted in June as our final budget at that time. Those preliminary numbers are coming in higher than originally projected, which is good news. And the difference is going to allow us to take a deeper dive into some flexible budgetary adjustments, which we will be presenting to you in our upcoming November meeting. Lastly, Priority 5 update, as Ms. Upchurch also alluded to, we did have our first DAC meeting of the year. We were excited to kick that group off. Last week we had several parent-teacher conferences, followed by a nice extended or mini fall break, if you will. So we're excited that we can welcome, hopefully, our teachers and staff back refreshed and ready to kick off the next several weeks leading up to our next break coming up around Thanksgiving. So kudos to all of our teachers and staff as we continue to work in that partnership effort. We will be, as we're referring to this production right now, or publication rather, pardon me, as a post-board meeting roundup. So our September edition received more than 9,000 views. So we're excited that we're getting a lot of traction from that type of communication. And we are nearing completion of our strategic plan branding efforts. So we're excited to share that with you as well as we're rolling out all of that as our first semester will come to a close. And kudos to Mark and his team on that. In addition to all of the great events and activities that are taking place and a number of outstanding competitions and events that are taking place, we are congratulating the Palmer Ridge softball team for qualifying for state. Congratulations. And then I think also, as was alluded to a little bit earlier, homecoming, which is really just a series of excellent experiences, school pride events and so forth that occurred over 2 full weeks, both at Palmer Ridge and Lewis Palmer High School. Just really proud of our kids and the staff for making such a fun and just encouraging atmosphere where our kids are really experiencing what is so important for them as they work through their high school experiences. And I believe, unless there's any questions for me, that is the conclusion of this update.
Any questions from the board?
Not at this time.
Awesome update. Very nice.
Thank you.
So our next agenda item is a deeper drill into board priority number 3, value our people and commit to continuous improvement. Dr. Summers, Kristen Stuber, and Kitty Overton will provide the deep dive and presentation.
Okay, and I'm going to position next to Kitty. Unfortunately, Kristen is ill, and so I'm going to be pinch hitting, so to speak. So let me get adjusted up here. So as you recall, our work session earlier this month, we spent time deep diving priority 3, specifically looking at the first priority item, which is developing sustainable and competitive compensation plans for teachers and staff. So what we're doing this evening is hitting on many of the same topics, perhaps a little bit more expeditiously here this evening. And in a slightly different order as well. So if you remember last time, we started with our funding situation, kind of that zoom out level, and then we looked at our workforce data, and then we ended on compensation. We're actually flipping that this time. So this continues to be an effort in refining our approach to sharing this information with our community. And we'll talk a little bit more about what these next steps include, but I'm just gonna do the best I can here, again, at a high level. Please feel free to pause. I did create a few question reflection slides in the presentation at the conclusion of our 3 mini sections. So first section here is around employee compensation. So we are going to spend some time in comparison mode around some of these different aspects of compensation, starting with average teacher salary. And as you can see from this data set, we are just over $50,000 currently average teacher salary. In comparison to, these are 7 other districts in our local region, some in the El Paso County area, some just outside, or one in particular in Dougco. And you can see that we currently are behind with only 2 districts that are a little bit lower than us right now, and that's Falcon 49, which incidentally does have an MLO currently on their November ballot. So if that is approved, then we would be second to last in the area around average teacher salaries in comparison. And then in our starting teacher salary range right now at the 36,000 range, we are currently running behind the 7 other districts that we're comparing ourselves to here. So you may remember this slide demonstrating our, over time since 92 through present, the average teacher salary gap at a national level, which different studies have different data points, but on average, we're looking at about an $8,000 gap between the national and the Colorado average teacher salary. And all that to say, and this graph is actually cut off, you can only see the upper states, Colorado's coming in around $53,000 on an average year teacher salary. And this is data from the National Center of Education Statistics back from 2018-19. I can tell you this trend still remains the same. At the end of the day, we're lagging both behind the national and the state averages. We also want to take time to zoom in a bit on our educational support staff. So these are a few different positions. Last meeting, we spent time looking at the starting wage per hour and then the difference to the average, which you can see highlighted in orange. And then we went a step further to show the snapshot of an employee who, based on an average work year, which there are different days worked, or different total number of days, a different average work day, although generally speaking it's about 7.5 hours. And based on that hourly wage, where does an individual sit in relationship to an annual compensation amount? So that's the figure that you see in the bottom right-hand section. So these are instructional paraprofessionals. These are our bus drivers, which we are the lowest starting rate currently for bus drivers compared to our area districts. Special education paraprofessionals. Our custodians, which happen to work a 261-day work year. And lastly, our building secretary. So as you're digesting those, we also called out from 2021 school year the current employee turnover rate. And you see that we are hovering right around 20%. A little bit later in our workforce data update, we spell that out to be a little bit higher from this most recent year.
Dr. Summers?
Dr. Summers,
No.
Yes,
might I ask a question?
of course.
Thanks. On the educational support statistics and data, are we roughly equivalent to our peer districts in terms of quality of educational support on an educational support to teacher ratio?
Mr. Schwartz, if I'm hearing your question correctly, are we experiencing an average ratio of educational support staff to teacher?
Yes.
I don't have that figure accounted for in this presentation. So if you're asking me how many on average paraprofessionals do we have to teachers, for example, or do you mean the whole educational support staff base?
I think I'm trying to get to, so we can do apples to apples compensation comparison area. And so my question, does Cheyenne Mountain School District, for example, have a similar quality of education support staff to Lewis Palmer or Cherry Creek?
So that would require some additional investigation. That's certainly something that we can research. I couldn't tell you offhand like an exact report that exists that would do that, so it would take some digging in order to get that ratio.
But here's where the question's heading. As we take a deep look at compensation, are we comfortable that we're spending dollars in the districts that are successful on the compensation side that we benchmark with against? That we're spending all our dollars in similar to as we compare.
Yes, I think I heard your statement there, Mr. Schwartz. So essentially, how do we compare in regards to a staffing ratio? In other words, are we adequately staffed in addition to how are we funding those that are actually working? Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I guess where I'm trying to get to is, do we have double the educational support staff of our peers? And or significantly more, significantly less, is that impacting our compensation dollars versus our?
Ron, I ask about is it's the quantity of support staff compared to our other peer districts versus the actual pay rate. And so if we have a higher quantity and a lower pay rate, we still may be providing a greater service in terms of higher numbers, but I don't know if you know those numbers.
Not offhand. It's worth looking at. I will tell you just my initial reaction to that is that every district is going to have differences of philosophy as a starting point in terms of what's adequate. You mentioned a district to the north that we do not compare ourselves to in this particular frame of our presentation right now. And I can tell you just from personal experience that they have several more staff typically allocated than what we would from a ratio perspective. That's Cherry Creek, not to beat around the bush on that. I can also tell you that it's one thing to say, here is what our goal is in terms of that allocation, but we also know how challenged we are right now by some unfilled positions, which continues to be a factor. And to some extent, there's going to be variability. For example, anytime you're looking at special education paraprofessional allocation, many times that is going to be driven not only based on how we're meeting the programming needs of a building, but there's also unique elements such as students who may be receiving one-to-one educational support or other ways of allocating those numbers. So all that to say is that the apples to apples comparison may not be as clean as what would be ideal, but it's certainly worth looking at from a lens that does assess both the quantity factor as well as how we're applying funding formulas, or excuse me, compensation formulas based on our funding. That's a long sort of answer, but there's a lot of pieces to that.
Yeah, not intended to create a make work project at all, just intended to make sure that as we compare, that we're attempting to compare apples to apples and what students get in terms of academic attention, if you.
Indeed.
Thanks, Ron. Teresa, were you going to ask a question?
No, Ron had texted me that he had a question.
I have a question. So before we move on, when we're looking at the employee turnover rate, do we have that information as it compares from year to year?
So this is our 2021 year comparison. We can pull information from CDE that goes a little bit further back. I can tell you that on a low end, we're looking at about 15%. On the higher end, we're looking at 21%.
I was just curious to see how it curves up and down throughout the years.
Sure.
And then my other question, when we're looking at these comparisons, different from Mr. Schwartz, I'm not as interested in where we compare to Cherry Creek, because our teachers and our staff are not necessarily going to be as the commute distance. We're going to be wanting to look at ourselves with all of our El Paso County school districts and our Douglas County school districts, ones that are within commuting distance. So those are the ones that everything from even Fountain, Fort Carson to all of these that are here in front of what I'm looking at. And when I'm looking at these comparisons, my other question, going up to slide, let me go up to it, slides 5 and 6, starting teacher salary versus average teacher salary. Do we have a comparison of where our veterans compare to with our neighboring districts?
When you say veteran, can you be more specific?
Are teachers that are on our higher pay scale.
So I think that's a next level of data that we can work to provide. I think the way that we would have to do that in order to achieve that apples to apples comparison would more than likely be an effort to, and this is quite a bit of work and why it's probably not currently included as a slide. You typically can think of salary in terms of quartiles, so kind of the second, the third, the fourth. So yes, obviously our teachers who are in a upper quartile, let's say working 15 or more years, their salary is averaged into what this total average salary is currently. So if the question is how does a, let's say, 20-year experienced teacher compare to somebody else teacher, and would be another level of data that we would have to pull from in order to go a step further there.
Okay, and then a follow-up to that.
Mm-hmm.
I know it may be in here and I just didn't scroll down far enough. Yeah, when we're looking at our workforce data, I am curious also to see how many of our staff are starting right in the middle and 15, 20.
Okay, that makes sense. So see if we can have a frequency distribution that speaks to those domains.
Yes.
And probably the other thing that we could take a closer look at within those domains is what's the range, sort of the low end to the high end of that range. We can look at in a couple of different ways through our local data, and it's gonna, like I said, a next level analysis as we're comparing that to other districts as well. I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm curious on our competition. We're competing for staff, so
Indeed.
know where we are. Thanks.
Very good.
Anything else from the board? I'd like to just make a couple observations.
Please.
Slide 14, which is your employee turnover, is almost inversely correlated to your average teacher salaries. So I could draw the conclusion that low pay is one reason we have higher turnover. That's probably not the only reason, but I think it's, when you look at all of the districts, there's a trend, there's a pattern that's clear. The other inference I'd make is that our average salary is closer in line to our other districts compared to our starting salary, which would tell me that we have some, at the higher quartile, if you will, using your term, we have more comparability.
I would, without having crunched the numbers myself, agree with that inference.
So the thing we talked about at the work session and that we requested was, what are the steps in our salary plan? And then what do these competing school districts, essentially, what are their steps? Where are we in trying to gather that? And is it something we'll see next year, early next year, or the next time we take a deep dive? Or is it something that we'll see in between now and then?
I would say that is our work. That's our effort that we'll have to engage in very deliberately in the coming months. And as it gets to a little bit later in our projected timeline, in terms of establishing options and recommendations forward, I would hope that we would have a really clear sense of what those different pathways are as early as January, February, March, so that we can continue to not only engage the community in the conversation of current state, but really how are we building out toward that future state.
And without that, it's hard to build that future state, what we want as a community want to look like.
Absolutely.
Seeing those more fine detailed comparisons.
Absolutely.
I don't know if the steps the right place or the quartiles, that either one works, but we need to see something about where do we fit across the spectrum or the demographics of our teacher population as compared to these other school districts. Because clearly the numbers you're showing for 2021, you could easily infer that people are leaving the lower paid school districts for higher wages. And it's not just our district. I mean, it's clear.
Appreciate that conversation through the analysis. So I think we have a few more compensation slides here that I'm just going to maneuver through, a couple newer slides that are also coming up. We did talk about a pupil-to-teacher ratio, and Mr. Schwartz, I'm going to sound a little bit ignorant in this regard. When we are talking about the total number of teachers in this graph, this is not necessarily an average class size. So to what degree do additional staff, whether they be instructional support staff, counselors, administrators even, factor into this pupil-teacher ratio piece of the puzzle? I don't think it answers your question completely, but what it does speak to is that we do have a higher ratio of pupils to teachers compared to some of our other surrounding districts. And we did, I believe, share this slide with you the last time in regards to that administrator per funded pupil. So what you're looking at here is the number of pupils per one administrator in comparison. And so we're on the higher end of that spectrum. as you look at those comparisons.
That also includes principals, instructional support, and other professionals. So do paras fall into that also?
This would not include paraprofessionals.
Okay. Would include like special education? When it says, I'm curious what instructional support is.
I think instructional support could be anything from a dean to a non-classroom based certified professional. And by certified, I mean somebody that would need an administrator license to do their job. So for example, we have actually we have 2 special education coordinators. I believe they would be accounted for within that total count, but that's some good additional information. This came straight from CDE, so it depends on how your data is being interpreted by them and how we look behind the scenes to understand that. This, I believe, was something that we did speak last time to that we did not include in the presentation. So what you see here, and Kitty, help me out if I miss any part of this, is for our current year, in regards to total salaries, according to CDE job code, you see the pie chart representing the percentage of allocation that is applied to each of these jobs, and then you see the budgeted numbers on the left-hand side there. So that's one piece of information, followed by the next slide, the same information in terms of salaries, in addition to the costs of our employer-paid benefits, which is an estimate, but you're looking at para being at 20.9%, Medicaid at 1.45%, and then insurance, which not all of our employees are necessarily receiving that employer pay benefit. They may not choose to be benefited, but that total amount plus the salary line is what you're looking at in terms of that total of 37, almost 200,000. And out of our current total 21-22 general fund budget, when we talk about 80% of our budget is applied to salaries and benefits, that's where that number's coming from.
Just for clarity, this general fund budget doesn't include any debt service payments. This is
That is
just
correct.
the operating.
Just
budget.
operating expenses. Yep. Okay, so that was the compensation information. Any other questions or reflections on those slides? Okay, I'm going to hustle through these pretty quickly because a lot of the data is essentially the same that we covered the last time. So this is our workforce data for the current school year. 751 total D38 employees, 52% licensed professional, 44% educational support staff, 4% administrators. We are not including seasonal employees, coaches, substitutes in that count. Here's our 391 licensed, also known as certified professionals, 351 teachers. You can see the spread in elementary and secondary, as well as teachers on special assignment. Special service providers, including counselors, social workers, psychs, speech language pathologists, occupational physical therapists, and nurses. Moving on to educational support, also referred to sometimes as classified employees. Here's the breakdown in both the numbers and the percentages. Our 33 administrators, we did go back to include our HSEA principal as part of that count. And she wears a few different hats, as do a few of these people wearing different hats.
That was going to be my next question, is some of the, when we talked before, do these break down when I'm looking, what slide are you on? Okay, so when we're looking at 9 principals, and we know that the principal at HSCA also wears another hat as our preschool
We're
coordinator.
counting her right now as a principal. Sorry to.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what's curious if when we're doing this breakdown.
Yeah, I could add more asterisks to explain every part of their job if we needed that level of information, but that would be several slides. I would gather.
Fair enough. I'm just curious when we're looking at these breakdowns, how many fall into multiple categories?
For the purpose of how we're sharing these numbers with you, we are only referring to what the primary job function or title would be. We're not necessarily saying, they're not being counted twice, in other words.
Okay.
So as we discussed earlier, we do have 164 new hires, which represents 22% of our current workforce. You can see the breakdown in terms of licensed professional educational support and administrators.
A
And we-
question.
Yes, ma'am.
The turnover rate was less than 22%, but the new hires are 22%. Is that accurate?
It's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship because you do have some positions that were unfilled as of the year before that we didn't necessarily count loss. So it's hard to get it right down to the one-to-one relationship, as well as vacancies that we're still working to fill.
Thank you.
And we didn't, yes, you're welcome. And we did not update this from the October 1. I do know, for example, the preschool hire that I mentioned earlier. So that, again, is data that was current as of earlier this month. So we're still on the search for some of these other roles. These were our total number of separations dating back to last January to the beginning of the school year. So we had 82 licensed professionals, with our highest turnover in special education and special service providers, as well as a considerably high number of world language and math, as we discussed last meeting.
Why do you think that category has been so problematic in finding people?
Which one, Mr. Clausen?
The special services?
That's a good question. I think not unlike some of our other positions, well, I'll just be frank. Those are really hard jobs. All of these jobs are very difficult. I do think there's an element of burnout. There's also an element of we do not compete with some of the districts that are paying, in some cases, $10,000 or more per those roles. So, for example, I can tell you that social workers, psychs, nurses, those types of positions, not only are you potentially going to make more in other school systems, but you can make also a lot more if you're working in different other type of industry roles. Nurses, clearly, social workers, psychs, depending on the type of practice that they're providing, they may be making more either in a private field or some other type of sector. Thank you. It's a good question. Here are our educational support separations. And we talked a little bit about some of the reasons for staff separations is we know this list can be somewhat long and very individualized depending on the individual we're talking to or about. Any questions or reflections on that? All right, so last section of the presentation, Kitty's gonna walk us through.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. So now that we've taken a close look at compensation and how we compare to neighboring districts, we also want to lay the groundwork for how public schools are funded in the state of Colorado and what that means in terms of available resources to D38 students and staff. The next few slides will be similar to what we saw at the board work session. So I won't be going into a lot of detail on every slide, but we have added a few things that were mentioned, questioned, or suggested at the work session. So the next few slides we'll talk about per pupil revenue, mill levy overrides, bond and mill composition, as well as trends in mill levy and assessed values. This is the same slide we showed at the board work session. We did have some questions about more in-depth look at the per pupil funding formula. So we've added a new slide that actually shows the full, there it is. Okay, thank So this is actually the formula that CDE runs through for every district in the state. In the blue block on the left-hand side, you'll see those those factors that we often refer to when we're talking about the formula. Those factors are the multipliers in the formula on the first line there, the very complicated looking one. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the categorical funding for such things as transportation, special education, gifted and talented. Those are additions, not multipliers in the formula. So hopefully that gives a little bit more perspective on how that formula is calculated for our total program.
What's the 0.12 factor in that formula?
I believe that's a risk factor. I would have to look more in depth at that.
It's against at-risk pupils, so it may be.
And there is a link, I think, on the previous slide to the actual calculation for all the districts in the state that actually puts the numbers in this formula. It's pretty, it's interesting to follow it.
So before we leave that, the right side is separate from the left side. Those are two different formulas altogether, correct?
You see the formula line, the first more complex one includes the factors on the left-hand side, and those equal J. And then J has the categorical funding from the right-hand side added to.
So there's J plus.
That's correct.
Right?
Yes. And that's still, so that's our total program funding.
S is total comprehensive funding. S.
Can you say what ASCENT is for anybody who doesn't know? Our ASCENT funding?
Amber, maybe? Okay.
Test. We do not benefit from ASCENT. It is as I understand it, is an online, not an online, but a college avenue for students who are eligible for additional college level work that allows them to earn, for those students that qualify, an associate's degree. It's more utilized in districts that have a higher percentage or significantly higher percentage of at-risk.
And the online, it's not a full PPR amount?
No.
The online funding amount in the formula is actually a little bit greater than the 8501 that we see in our formula. But our district has, I think, 3.5 students that qualify for that.
Straight online programming. Yep.
So total S, comprehensive funding, that's PPR. That's how you get there, right? S equals PPOR.
That's how you get to the 8501 per student.
Okay.
Okay. This next slide is a representation in dollars of that base funding. This year's estimate based on projected pupil count, not final pupil count, is $55 million. The orange block there shows how much of that $55 million is funded through local taxes, and the blue portion is state equalization.
This particular slide, someday I'd like to see a trend of how that ratio has changed over time.
I believe we looked at that.
We did start looking at that, and it hadn't changed significantly enough for us to think it was necessary to the discussion. But we can show you that. This was in our previous presentation as well, breaking out the per pupil funding and then showing the mill levy override portion on top of that as we compare to other school districts in this comparison. And then we took it a step further on this slide to show the proportion of local tax dollars and state equalization that contributes to that base funding, 8501 per student. and then our 616 mill levy override for District 38 and how that compares to our neighboring districts. So we just broke it out a little bit further. We also had some questions during the work session about some of the factors and what those might look like in comparison to our neighbors. This is the cost of living factor. Lewis Palmer does rank fairly high in this particular factor, not surprisingly. And then this next one shows the at-risk factor. Again, not surprising, we rank fairly low in this factor, and both of these impact our bottom line funding. And finally, again, we look at the budget stabilization factor, and just to point out that for this current school year, the budget stabilization factor is a negative factor that reduces funding by about $568 per student. As we talk about school funding in the state of Colorado, and engage the community in these discussions, we also want to provide additional basic information about mill levy. In District 38, the average assessed home value would yield approximately $596,000 in investment dollars for each additional mill. Those mills, one mill would equate to approximately $35 per year for the average homeowner in our district. This representation is just the mill, the locally funded portion. I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. This does not include the basic funding. This is the bond and the mill levy override portion of the mills. So you can see this in comparison to other districts in our neighboring area. The orange part is the bond mill, and the blue part is the mill levy override.
The bond part, I think it's worth clarification for anyone who doesn't know. Bonds are not, the funds don't go to the student or the classroom. Those are basically like
Right,
mortgage
the
payment.
bond mill will pay for the bond debt that the
Right.
district has already obligated for, and that will adjust each year depending on how much is left to pay on those bonds.
It's
And
not
then-
revenue. It's not money that can be used in a classroom.
That is correct. It is just for capital improvements and debt that we already have incurred. We also wanted to talk to the trend a little bit. The dark blue line, or sorry, the dark bold red line is District 38. This is a trend of the mill levy over a 10-year period. 10 years ago, we were second to the top as far as total mill levy, and currently we rank at the bottom when we compare to these particular districts. The horizontal line there, I think it's orange or yellowish orange, that's District 20. The difference there is they set their mill levy at a fixed rate. And so as assessed values change over time, their mill levy stays the same, and some of those additional tax dollars actually do help fund their operations. And then finally, we show here the increase in assessed values over time, as well as the decrease in our total mill levy for District 38. Basically, this translates into, even though homeowners may be paying additional taxes as assessed values are rising, we are not necessarily seeing the benefit of that to our students in the classroom. In summary, we're just showing the data here has a downward trend for District 38 in regards to per pupil revenue, community investment, and compensation. Despite the high quality of education our students receive, District 38 ranks close to last comparative to other districts in this presentation in terms of public education investment. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Summers for next steps.
So just as another reference for where we're at in our timeline, we are in the analysis of our current state as part of our Priority 3 deep dive. We are looking forward to next month's meetings with our board as well, because we know that we're only presenting a picture really as it comes to salaries and benefits as part of that compensation conversation. So we will be looking more closely at our budget allocations as a whole, as well as looking at opportunities for budgetary adjustments based on the October count data that we will be able to speak to going into November. We believe that it's critical for us at this time to really share this analysis and continue to engage the community over the next few months. So we will be sharing this information both with our staff through the form of presentations, as well as hosting different focus groups with different employee groups to continue to get their perspective and their input in this process, as well as how we share this information more broadly with the community. So there's some different ideas that we have about that we're not prepared to go into a ton of detail on tonight, but needless to say, we'll be offering more and more opportunities for community engagement. And to the extent the board also wants to join us in those presentations or in feedback loops along the way, we're going to certainly invite you all at any point you're able to be part of those conversations. We do see our work, going back to an earlier part of our presentation, being efforts toward co-developing this desired state. And we see that work starting as we work into the winter and then well into the spring of 2022, which will also include opportunities for continuous community engagement. So we kept this high level, at least at this point in time, but these are the broad stroke next steps that we're putting in front of you. And I believe there were a couple of slides. I was actually planning on that being the final slide, but I didn't want to miss an opportunity to just share that these are some additional next steps with some more detail that we did talk about through the work session. We did have a closure slide as well in terms of questions that we would anticipate sharing with the community as we continue to deep dive this topic. So with that, I will open the floor back to any other questions, comments, reflections.
So when it says go deeper into budget analysis priority 4, which is November, that will help tie this as well in terms of how we are funded as a school district.
We will, and I don't want to necessarily use numbers right now, but we will be looking at the difference from our projected enrollment to the actual and talking about what impact that will be to dollars that we have available that we didn't necessarily have budgeted back in June. So within that conversation, I think we have some different opportunities to look at. So I think part of that is what are our current projected actuals and what opportunities may exist to be able to address, I'll put under the frame short-term compensation actions that, as you remember last year, we were in a position to be able to take. I'm not sure that we're in the same position to be able to envision that same type of action or perhaps other actions, but I think that's all information that will be part of our work session agenda and then leading into the regular meeting in November.
Okay.
And I would add just the whole notion of the flexible budgeting approach, because we know that it's a fluid target, and we were conservative in our estimates with student enrollment coming out of the COVID year and not really anticipating numbers that we just didn't feel completely comfortable with at the time we made those projections, back in April, May.
So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to just take a moment here and look at Cheyenne 12. So
slide.
Well, I'm going to go through, I'm starting on slide 5, but I'm going to do several slides. So if I look at Cheyenne 12, their average salary appears to be roughly 10% higher than ours, roughly. Their beginning salaries maybe 15% higher. And then I scroll down through, I'm skipping some of those hourly ones, I apologize for that, but I'm wanting to make a point. So their turnover rate, which is slide 14, is about the median, whereas ours is probably 10% higher. If we look at the teacher or the pupil-teacher ratio, they're at about 15.07, we're about 17, so there's about 2 difference. If we continue to the admin, they're at about 45, we're at about 42 and a half, so they have higher admin per pupil. And I keep going down to then some of these, the last part of the presentation.
Can I stop you?
Uh-huh.
You were spot on with the exception of that administrator funded per pupil. So just so
Did I interpret that wrong?
Yeah, I just want to be clear about that. Where are we? Here we go.
Slide 816.
So what this means, they may have one less administrator than we do. So the numbers that are lower means more administrators per funded pupil as opposed to fewer. And I think if I heard you said more administrators per pupil. They would have perhaps one or however many less in comparison.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's nearly comparable, but I was reading it backwards.
Yes, I just wanted to catch that one point.
Okay. So then
But you were doing great before.
But then I get down into I'm at slide 36. So I look at Cheyenne Mountain and their PPOR base is within 20 cents of ours.
Correct.
They have about 997 MLO. We have about 616. So slight difference there. Theirs is slightly higher. So when I look at this, just from head count, average salaries, etc., it doesn't tie out because their salaries are quite a bit higher. And yet, when you look at the actual revenue, so what this would suggest to me is they must not have busing system.
They do not have busing.
So there's other costs that
there are other factors
that impact this. And when I just look at the presentation in and of itself, I'm like, how could we be that different? But it's these other factors, right?
That is a considerable factor. Just quick math on my part.
How many
They have about $381 more per pupil.
They have about the same.
So if you were to, and they have a roughly 6,000, that's about 2.28 million more in revenue based on their mill levy structure.
That $300?
381.
Okay. Which is significant. I'm
It
not
is.
going to discount that. I'm just saying. Then I go to the next slide. Again, now I'm on 37. And I see the breakout between local share and state share. But that doesn't, what does that tell me?
That we are essentially equal with the exception of the mill levy.
Right. It's the same information, really.
Yep.
And then I get the cost of living factors. I'm not sure what these mean. I mean, I saw the formula, and these are just subsets of that big formula, right?
Correct.
At the end of the day, PPOR is what we're really talking about.
Correct.
And it's a complicated formula to end up with S, right?
Yes.
Same with that risk, et cetera. So I get down to the bond and the override, which is 43 and 49. So here, Cheyenne Mountain, their levy is for bond and override, not the general fund, appears to be around 27 and a half. Ours is 17 and a half, roughly, correct? So then I go to the next slide, and as you noted, a District 20, which is the top gold line here, it's flat. And it's flat because their funding isn't based on pure PPOR. It's actually based on the mill levy that they set each year, and it's a fixed rate regardless of the assessed value in their community, correct?
That's correct.
Whereas the others are up and down, and some of that up and down, like I'll use ours as an example. Our assessed value has been growing, so our mill levy rate drops. And it has each year I've been on the board. It just continually goes down because as the assessed value of our community grows, our mill levy rate goes down. Unlike D20, just to the south of us, that they get more money because as the assessed value grows in their community, their revenues go up. And that's the portion above on the bar charts above the PPOR, correct?
Yes.
So looking at that, I see, I'm sorry, I might be a little colorblind here, but I think it's at the end, on the far right, it's the second one down. Is that
For Cheyenne 12, that's correct, yes.
Okay. And it appears to be flat for the last 3 or 4 years.
Since 18, I believe, yeah.
So have they switched to a funding formula similar to District 20?
That's a fixed or a flat cap.
I
don't know I do not know that.
I believe that was on their ballot. Don't quote me on that, but if I
Can we confirm that? Because it appears from this slide that they have been fixed for, it looks like 4 years.
Yep.
Whereas everyone else looks to be, well, maybe what's the one?
Falcon also, I think, passed.
The second from the bottom, is that Falcon?
Falcon is the
Maroon.
one that's, they're right now hovering in the middle. But again, this is the total mill, so this includes the bond,
Oh, it might be
the
Douglas County I'm
base,
looking at.
and the MLOs.
Okay, but I see, yes, they passed something, so they increase their overall.
They have something on the ballot
But it's
this year.
It's still variable, and my point being is of all of our comparisons here, if I'm reading this correctly, of all of our comparisons, District 20 and District 12 have a fixed levy rate. It appears, based on this.
I'll double check on 12th. Yeah.
All the other school districts have a fixed
Variable.
bond amount or a fixed MLO amount, so that assessed values go up, their rates go down. That's what it appears. I just want it to be confirmed. This is the way I'm reading it. I don't want to be wrong in how I'm reading it, but so I need you to validate what I'm saying.
Understood.
Because it appears to me that, and I kind of like to compare us to Cheyenne 12 because they're a similar student population. They're high quality, and I want to take their place, highest quality, etc. I mean, when we get to the ideal, right, Teresa, we want to be the best. So the point being is, as we compare their funding formulas, I want to make sure we're comparing apples and apples.
Absolutely.
And so what I'm seeing here, I'm just wanting to make sure that we really understand those lines mean something. And I want to make sure we understand what they mean.
Okay.
Does that question make sense to everybody? I hope it does. Okay. That was it. That was my Cheyenne Mountain District 12 comparison.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Any other questions or comments? Ron? I think we're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Forgot where I was sitting for a minute. Thanks, Kitty.
So the next, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections of our agenda tonight is policy revisions or new policies. Number 2 is a second reading. Number 3 is a second reading. Number 4 is a second reading we broke it out separate. And then that was number 4. Number 5 is a first reading of a revision to BEDH, our public comment. First reading of policy J. And so what I'd like to do is I'll go through these, particularly the second readings. I'm just going to make a motion on number 2 to approve the revisions to the following policies. GDG, part-time and sub-employment. JLCB, immunization of students. JLCD, administering medications, and JLCDB, administration of medical marijuana as presented.
I'll second that, Mr. Taylor.
Any comments, questions, discussion?
I have one comment. And that's when we look at the revisions on these, many of these, when I look at them, they're based on statutes that were voted on. And there's some statutes that the way they're worded, I personally don't agree with, but because I'm for local control, but I appreciate that the work that went into this, that we are ensuring that we are in compliance and that this isn't a reflection of anybody's view on any of them one way or another, but I do appreciate the work that went into this to make sure that we do stay in compliance.
Anything else from anyone? If not, Ms. Wood, would you call the vote?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Mr. Schwartz? Mr. Schwartz?
I believe we may have lost.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
That was going to pass anyway, so I think we'll move on. If that's okay. So, number 3, which is I'd like to make a motion to adopt the following new policies. GBI, Criminal History Record Information. GCHA/GCHB, Mentor Teacher/Administrators. GCHC, Professional Staff Induction Program. GCI, Professional Staff Development, and IKE, ensuring all students meet standards as presented.
I'll second the motion.
Comments, questions? Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Aye.
Is Mr. Schwartz back? Okay. Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
Excellent, thank you. The next one is number 4. I would like to make a motion to approve the revisions to policy IMB-teaching controversial issues and materials as presented.
I'll second the motion.
Comments, questions, discussion?
I'll just say that we had a discussion about this in the work session, and just for a number of reasons, I don't think that it imparts value that's helpful in terms of teaching controversial subjects. I think it's also could be misplaced. I just had a few misgivings, but and so I will be voting no, but I just wanted to be transparent about that. And as we move forward, I just want to make sure that we're as transparent as we can whenever we add substantial language to policy.
Very good. And I want to add to that comment that if there are unintended consequences that result from this policy, it can be revisited and should be. So I just,
Sure.
To support your process there.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Wood?
Mr. Clausen?
Aye.
Ms. Phillips?
Nay.
Mr. Taylor?
Aye.
Ms. Upchurch?
Aye.
Number 5 is a first reading. This came about from our work session, I believe, where we were talking about public comment and how we, during the pandemic, read emails, and that wasn't really part of our policy, but we've really, I hope, this language has opened it up to have more input, and if someone sends in public comments, it could be part of the public record. Likewise, those who speak publicly, theirs can be part of the public record, should they choose to give us a copy of it, correct?
Yes.
Any comments or questions from members of the board?
I did have a question on this one. So with the new wording, any stakeholder is also able to submit a public comment digitally in the form of an online submission available at lewispalmer.org, Board of Ed, that will be entered into the public record. Submissions must follow the guidelines for in-person comments and will be limited to 450 words. That makes sense to me. My question is, what do we do with it from there? Are we going to be required to read it, or is it just going to be entered into public comment or public record only?
Our thought on that was to mitigate any potential conflict that would exist as a function of digital submission public comments, is that all we would commit to doing is posting those as essentially the data that comes in through our public comment section of the agenda, but that there's not an expectation that the board would read that into the record. Instead, it would just become part of the public comment record based on what's been submitted through this form. So again, the short answer to that is no, no one would be expected to read it, but it would appear as written based on what's submitted digitally.
And this digital public comment form is different than submitting an email to the board?
Yes, and that's the expectation in order for it to be accounted for as part of the public record.
Thank you.
And attached is the form itself, so I appreciated being able to see that, and I thought it was well done.
Correct. That's kudos to Mark on that.
Any other comments today?
I just appreciate the effort on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the next item is the first reading of the following policies. JB, equal educational opportunities. JF, admission and denial of admission. JICDD, violent and aggressive behavior. JICDE, bullying prevention and education. JII, student concerns, complaints, and grievances.
I think we're prepared to answer any questions you may have. We weren't necessarily anticipating a presentation though, so.
Is this on our original matrix?
Yes.
So that we have contact or points of contact
Yes.
if needed? Okay.
So we posted these on the last work session as the introduction of the specific policy, sorry.
And where did the formation of these come from?
Primarily CASB updates, unless I'm missing anything, Mr. Frampton, was that the genesis of most of these?
And change to statute?
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, let's go to item 7, which is financial planning analysis / SR3 preliminary budget.
I'm sorry, I did have a question.
Oh, sorry.
On the last one, on JII, where we're striking that last sentence in that first paragraph. I was curious why we were striking that.
Did you hear that, Mr. Frampton?
Yeah, it's the students' concerns,
Yes.
complaints, and grievances. Are you referring to the very last section, which students are encouraged to report? Is that
Student concerns, complaints, that's the first paragraph.
before that.
the first paragraph? Complaints shall be appealed in the same school year they allegedly occurred within 90 days of the end of a school year.
I was just curious if there, why we struck that out of the language, out of the policy. And why we struck complaint procedures AC-R. Is it covered in a different policy somewhere else?
Yeah, no, I can speak. I can speak to the reason we're striking that. The primary reason, when we by policy tie our hands to such tight constraints and timelines, is it might prohibit us from looking at a complaint when it's very appropriate. So we didn't want to provide those tight constraints for the benefit of the kids, or to hold us accountable for some timelines that may not be appropriate in those circumstances.
Okay.
Ms. Upchurch, can I just check for understanding? Does that resonate with you? Because I think that's something I just want to make sure we're attuned to.
Yes, if I understand, Mr. Frampton is saying that the way it was worded restrained student voice, and this allows students more opportunity and from one school year to the next.
Yes. Another way to look at that is there's not a shelf life on a complaint. So we don't want to rule out something being brought to our attention. Of course, we're going to encourage it to be brought to our attention sooner rather than later, but we don't want a time constraint to be the reason why we do not investigate something.
Okay.
No tardy bell then?
In this particular context, no tardy bell.
Are we good?
There are still tardies, though.
So, Kitty Overton, what do you want to present first?
Okay, so in your board packet, you did have the regular monthly financial revenue and expenditure reports, as well as Monument Academy reports and the district enrollment for the month. Were there any questions on any of those?
Is the numbers we see on the enrollment, the October count now, is that accurate?
It's not the final count. It's as of October 1st. That was the initial count, and that still needs to be finalized.
So based on this, we're so year over year, is that a good way for me to say?
If we're currently looking at this year over last year, there's not much of a gain for District 38. It's pretty much a wash with the Monument Academy growth. However, our projected growth, our projected enrollment was quite a bit lower. So we will see a difference between our projections that we based our adopted budget on and what we're coming in at with our actual
At the
October count.
6,636, which includes MA and all schools, is 142 more than last year.
Correct, but 147 are new at Monument Academy.
Got it. And what was the total number from the budget, if you can remember?
The total was 6,025 on the projected budget.
Oh my goodness.
And included in that was a projection for HSEA,
Right.
for preschool count, for half-day kinder count. So it's not, it's exactly a difference of 60-25 to the 66-36. We have to flesh that out some.
You've just piqued my interest for November. And
It is
Leave it
good.
at
It
that.
is good news in one way of looking at it. Yes.
We just don't want to speak too soon about that.
And will we be able to see a report in the future of how many of our students are enrolled that are not, do not reside within D38, like we've seen in the past?
Yes. So that will also be reflected in our finalized October count analysis. Yes.
Thanks. I have a question. Okay. Are you done?
I was going to have move on, but if you go ahead.
How much do we have in savings?
I would have to look to speak to that for sure. You're talking about our reserved funds.
Yes.
November.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I let you know that?
Yes.
And as we go through the audit, we'll have a better picture of our beginning fund balance and how that all breaks out.
Thank you. November, you said?
Yes, we'll be doing a deeper dive into the priority 4 and the financials in November. Anything else on those before I present the Sr3 preliminary budget? So, as you know, we did conduct a survey. The survey went out to students, staff, community members, some special interest groups, asking for input to how to best utilize our Sr3 grant funding. This is a first stab, kind of a preliminary look at how the survey spoke to the different priorities of our strategic plan and how we can utilize these dollars to support those priorities. So I just made kind of, I tried to align the dollars with the priorities that kind of fleshed out through the survey. So you'll see here, social emotional well-being was of great importance to our stakeholders. Also continued improvements to facilities and safety, as well as focused intervention programs and continued emphasis on technology equipment. So based on that input, these are just preliminary numbers, and as we move into November, we'll be asking for additional input, not in the form of another survey, but there will be opportunities to make comment on these line items, and we will also be detailing them out further. Some of these items you'll see are dollars over the period of 2 to 3 years, because we do have until September of 2024 to spend these dollars. Others may be a one-time commitment of funds up front for 1 year. So those are other details of the budget that can be discussed, and details that can be honed out as we move further into the budgeting process. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so the budget that we'll review in November has some of these funds, will have some of these funds.
The budget, as far as the modified budget,
Yeah, the
overall?
budget that we're going to end up approving eventually here, does it have ESSER funds in it?
The goal for the ESSER funding will be to submit December.
Separate and apart from our operating
That's
budget.
correct.
Okay,
Be part of the grant fund.
understood. So it's not part of our normal budgeting process. But when I look at these, I'm going to go down to priority 3, and it's got salaries and benefits for 2 to 3 years. And then it's listed a few specific roles, it appears. Is that from the survey, those roles, or?
Those are roles that we could see a need that would serve the priority that was pointed to in the survey.
So, just so I understand that, so we would be having people that would be here for 2 to 3 years, but there's no guaranteed funding beyond that, correct?
That is correct, yes. These are actually existing positions in the district, so funding them with the ESSER grants would essentially free up some general fund dollars for other needs during the period of time that we have ESSER funding available to support those positions.
And could we see that in this? So if, what I heard you say is, yeah, we've got $500,000 in 2 to 3 years that we could apply from an ESSER perspective to these roles. But in reality, those roles already exist, so we would have money freed up from our general budget. I'd like to know what that is and what it would be used for.
And we have to be careful with that within the rulings of the grant and make sure that we're not supplanting any
That's the reason I
positions.
raised the question, frankly.
I think there's an understanding with these ESSER funds that that's the current need for these dollars. So again, we have to go through the approval process for the budget and have that all approved by CDE.
I have a question on the survey. Will we still at some point be able to see the fill in the blank at the end? Any additional input that was at the end of that survey? I'd just be curious to know
I'd
if
like
any of
Mark
it-
to speak to that, actually.
if there were unique ideas or thoughts that were out there that still fall under the ESSER, what can be covered by ESSER. I was just curious.
We can absolutely collate that for you. A cursory, a cursory look at the roughly 140 fill-in-the-blank responses netted a potpourri of ideas, so to speak. A lot of it was, please pay us more. And then there were a few ideas that you might see some value in. So I'm happy to collate that in maybe the form of a word cloud and maybe the top 5 ideas. Again, some of that might be subjective, but there's a lot of responses and not all of them are necessarily productive to the task at hand.
Sure, I would expect we might see some responses that we would say, yeah, that doesn't qualify for ESSER funding, but maybe there's some ideas out there as we're looking at, as Mr. Taylor pointed out with priority 3, for example.
Sure. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Kitty, can you speak to the contracted services under social emotional well-being?
That is primarily our contracted psychologists. They come in about $150,000 per year. So that is over the 2 to 3 year period.
And so then line 2, the salaries and benefits would be specifically for?
I have that here. Those were additional. Ann McGann, what is her role? Ann McGann.
Okay.
So that would be one example of another place where we could use that funding.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty. Looking forward to November.
Big month.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second the motion.
Comments, questions? Hearing none, Ms. Wood?
Aye.
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 Well, let's just adjourn the meeting then. Thank you all.
Thank you.
That was a 3-hour cruise.